Happy Pride readers! Welcome to Pride Book Fest. I am Terry Blas. I go by he, him pronouns. I am the author of Deadweight, the author of Hotel Dare, and the author of the upcoming book Lifetime Passes, and currently the author of the Marvel series Reptile. I am so excited to bring to you this panel today. It is storytelling and queer narratives in graphic novels and comics, and that is what we are going to talk about. So let's meet our panelists. So I believe let's start with Ethan.
Hello, my name is Ethan Aldridge. I'm an author, illustrator, and cartoonist. I'm the creator of the Estranged graphic novel series, as well as The Legend of Brightblade, which comes out next year. Oh, and my pronouns are he or they.
And let's go to Claudia.
Hi, I'm Claudia Aguirre. I'm a comic book artist. I work with Terry and Hotel Dare and a bunch of other beautiful and queer books. My pronouns are she and her, and I love doing comics.
All right, let's move over to DJ.
Hi, my name is DJ Kirkland. I'm a comic book artist, and the book that I've worked on is The Black Mage as the artist. That's published through Oni Press, and I've actually also worked with Josh Trujillo on Dream Daddy in the past, and I've also worked on the Agresco comics as well.
All right, Steve?
And my pronouns are they, them. Sorry, not they, them, or he, him. Sorry.
All right, Steve.
Well, I'm Steve Orlando. No real preference for pronouns. I have done all sorts of queer books and all sorts of books in general. Most recently, coming up actually with Claudia, where I'm in Marvel Pride, debuting a new character, Somnus, along with Dakin. But you might have seen me around with Martian Manhunter, one of the first bisexual erasure narratives, Midnighter and Apollo, The Unexpected. I mean, I've been all over. Kill a Man, an LGBTQ plus mixed martial arts book. If it's a book, I'm probably writing it somehow. And very excited to be talking to everyone today.
All righty, Josh.
Yeah, I'm Josh Trujillo, he, him. I'm a writer and narrative designer out of Los Angeles. I've worked on books like Dodge City, Love Machines, Declaration, Death Saves, and I do nonfiction comics for the Nib. You can read the debut story for Aaron Fisher, The Gay Captain America, at the end of June in the United States of Captain America #1.
All righty, thank you, everybody. Let's dive right in. I want to start with a question that I think a lot of us get, especially from a lot of young people. And that question is, how did you get your start writing or illustrating comics? And was it difficult to, quote unquote, break into the industry? That is a question that I think is different for everyone. So yeah, I'd love to hear what anyone has to say about that. Let's start with DJ.
Okay, so my comics journey has been pretty interesting. To take it all back, like I went to school at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and every year the editors from various comic publishers would come to our school for a thing that we called Editors Day, and they would do portfolio reviews for students, and some students would potentially get work from that, or just kind of like build up relationships with different publishers. And Oni Press would always come to our school every year. So I've gotten to know like James Lucas Jones and Charlie Chu. Like I've known them since like 2008 or 9 at this point, which is wild to even think about. I've known them for over a decade at this point. And after I graduated in 2009, it was about like another 5 or 6 years before I got my first gig doing Black Mage, and that conversation started in 2015. So there was a lot of downtime between graduating from college, because graduated in probably one of the worst economic crises we've had, especially back in the early 2000s and late 2000s going into the 2010s. So there were like no jobs to be had for anybody. So it was just a lot of just like working full time and doing art stuff on the side and hoping and praying and wishing that someone would see me and give me an opportunity. And finally that came around with Black Mage in 2015. So it's definitely been a challenge. It's not easy.
I'm going to move clockwise around according to my screen. So that would be Steve.
Well, I mean, I I knew I wanted to do comics from a very early age. I started going to Comic Cons when I was 12 and started trying to get work at Marvel and DC. And of course, that was foolish at the time, but I sure tried. But what I did meet all those years ago was two of my earliest mentors, the folks from Man of Action Studios, who had just left comics and started doing animation. Now they did things like Ben 10 and things like that. And from the time I was young, I would bring them new scripts every year at New York Comic Con and San Diego Comic Con, and they would tell me what to make better, what to make more professional, and said that when the time came that I had done all those things to their satisfaction, that they would help me out. So almost 20 years later of doing that, it was I guess 2012 or 2014, I can't remember specifically. And I finally had something that they thought was publishable. And sure enough, they put it in the hands of Image. And that was me being a 5-second / 2-decade overnight success. Because once I finally had something, which ended up being my book Undertow, it was, they put it in the hands of the publisher and they said, yeah, this is ready to go. And so in some ways it happened very quickly, but in other ways it took 2/3 of my life to get into comics. But when we're trying to do it, I always find it important to say, I had a day job for 10 years before comics, and more so, I probably quit, all the time. And then I would just get angry at myself and come back. You can't, it can always be the next week. That's always what you have to remember. You might think it's not going to happen, but the week after you say that could be when it happens. So, I've been in, at least in a way that I could make something of a living since I was 29. This is going to be 7 years of that now. And look, plenty of times I thought it wouldn't happen, but I'm incredibly stubborn and wouldn't stop. And the same should be said for you. Maybe you can be less of an asshole than me when you keep going, but you got to keep going. Just when you think it's over, it's never over, and it can happen. But you got to keep working.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of times when we encourage young people to take a portfolio to a convention or show their work, it's often in the context of art. And I don't think we often, some people who write don't think that they can take a script portfolio to a convention, but you obviously can.
With the right people, and they're usually creative peers, not editors, which I always make time to say too. Like the average comic editor, God love them, not going to have time to read your spec script. So if you want to show things to editorial, you do need to find someone. It's going to be much more beneficial to self-fund or however you get there, do an 8 to 10 page story, show you can tell a story in that space and hand it in as a completed comic, than handing someone your one-shot masterpiece script. Because the reality is that those folks work their asses off. They barely have time to read the scripts that they're paid to read. Needless to say, the ones that are just, to help you along the way. So yes, if you're a writer, you can give credit and you should reach out to people, but you should try to find creative peers that maybe, that you respect, obviously, and whose opinion you trust, and then get the work, be patient, because they're going to be busy too. So it might not happen, the first week you send them something. And then it maybe goes without saying, but it's important because I didn't do this for a long time. Take the critiques, if you have folks that you respect and whose work you like, you really don't need to be told to an extent what's great about your work. You already know that. They're there to make you better. So when you do hear about things that you can improve upon and sort of revisit, it's easy to say, oh, well, there's nothing wrong, but take it to heart, know that it's to make your work better, make you the better version of yourself, and get in there and do the work. And trust me, it's not going to take 20 years like it did for me. Things are much faster now with the advent of the internet and things like that. So it will be a journey, but it's one that's well worth taking, and you can get in there.
That's really good advice. Josh?
Yeah, I've always wanted to do comics from a very early age. I would trace over Garfield comics and rearrange them to make my own. And I would always do superhero stuff as well. But out of high school, out of college, I got an internship at a big publisher, and I thought that was going to be my big break, but it was kind of disheartening to find out that it wasn't. And kind of like Steve, it took about 20 years before anyone took me seriously as a creator. And I had to work a side job. I waited tables for 10 years. I worked for a technology company. I did a bunch of odd jobs. But slowly, I kind of refined my craft to writing short stories. And eventually, I was able to pay artists enough to kind of generate a portfolio of work. And that was something I could show other creators and I could show editors. And that's kind of how people started to take me more seriously as a creator. I would just tell people to be like infinitely patient and infinitely kind, and like don't burn bridges, and just be available for people, because like other professionals will see that in you. And that's always been my experience. Like eventually you'll get your chances. You just have to put the work in up front.
Yeah, I don't feel like I know too many people working in comics who were some overnight success. Like the overnight is like years and years of work.
I think Bendis had a quote that's something like, he worked in comics for 10 years before he got his first paycheck. And I had 15 years, but we'll get there.
Yeah. Alrighty, Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, my story is very similar to the others, where I liked comics. I enjoyed illustrated stories from a very, very young age. The college I went to didn't have an illustration program. It was like a very small, like central Utah college. I think I majored in printmaking or something sort of book related. And then when I moved to New York, I was very lucky that I got a literary agent fairly quickly. But work did not come for, several years. I originally was trying to get into things like picture books or illustrating like prose novels, like children's prose novels, which I do that also. But work wasn't coming, and so I got a job at a little bakery in Brooklyn near the park, and I was lucky enough that I had a boss who let me write or sketch, whenever there was no customers in, or the shop had been cleaned up and the shelves, cookies or whatever had been stocked.
Oh, that's all we want is a boss like that, right?
Yeah,
Let's just draw.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, like some of the others have talked already about how we all had to have side jobs during that sort of long run up to getting our first paycheck. And even having those side jobs, there's like a certain amount of privilege that you can luck into with that. So like a lot of bosses I know who I've worked for in the past, would not in any way allow me to sort of pursue those things. But I was very lucky with this boss that it was a small bakery that my boss owned. And so as long as the work was done, I could write and I could sketch. And so I wrote the entirety of the script for my first graphic novel there. I'd actually written it as a webcomic originally. And it was just as a way to like practice illustration skills, practice my writing skills. I began producing it just on Tumblr. And I got in at a convention in New York City where I was showing off some prints and some of the hand-done original pages for the comic. And I was very lucky that an editor at HarperCollins saw it, a queer editor. And they inquired about the book. And like I said, I had a literary agent at that point, and I've just been producing original graphic novels since then. So I sort of, it seems like everyone else backed very slowly into it over time.
Yeah, that sounds right. Claudia?
Well, similarly to everyone else, I actually studied graphic design. I'm really bad at it, but I worked while I was in school back then, and I cycled between a bunch of really abusive and insane design jobs. And after a while, I found this work in a small animation studio that was doing random things because for some reason they wanted to do this animated series, and I went into that production. So I started to slowly realize that my childhood dream of actually doing comics and cartoons was feasible. So I started pursuing the dream like seriously about 10 years ago. And I started going to conventions and talking to people and, just having fun, making friends. And you can say I had this big break when a friend of mine told another friend of hers that me and my friend were available for work. And that's how I started like doing professionally in a way, because I have a bunch of self-published books. But I think one of the most important things I have learned in my journey is that the people you know are the most important things that are going to help you, because we are a big family. We especially queer creators, we help we help each other. We have our backs, and especially with artists, having a portfolio online and showing it around on conventions and talking to other creators. It's always like the very first thing I tell to my younger friends who want to be comic book artists or want to go into animation is that you have to be out there. You have to talk to people. You have to be the best version of yourself that you can, because that's what we want to see in the world, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that question seems to be asked to us by, like I said, by a lot of young people. And what I try to impart to young people is to worry less about inspiration and to focus more on motivation and dedication, to dedicate yourself to treating artwork or writing like work. You know, produce a bunch of work, and then you'll have stuff to show an editor, and you'll have stuff to show an agent. So that's, I don't know, that's sort of my opinion on the subject. But I'm curious in regards to when we all first started working in comics, what kinds of stories we wanted to tell. So that kind of has to do with, I think, things that influenced us growing up or sort of our individual tastes. But yeah, when you started working in comics, what kinds of stories were you really eager to tell? Let's start with DJ.
Wow, this has always been a really loaded question for me, because there's still so many things that I want to do and things that I didn't know that I wanted to do until I was asked to do them when I got into comics. Coming from like a background of somebody that's been like reading manga since I was like 5 or 6 and watching anime for around the same time too, like, and watching Sailor Moon, I was like, I want to make a Sailor Moon, like I want to do that. And that's always kind of been the end goal. Like I still want to make a Magical Girl book or a show or something, but I definitely wanted to tell stories that were very much heavily influenced by anime and manga. And when I got that opportunity to do that with Black Mage, it was like that dream kind of coming true. It's like a book that's all about, like, again, like being a Black person in a predominantly white institution and the things that go alongside that with being othered in that kind of community as a person of color. But it's also injected with all of the love and reverence for like Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1 RPGs and anime, which was like, this is a dream come true to be able to do this and inject all the things that I love into that book. I still want to tell more stories like that, but as I've gotten a little bit older and more comfortable with wanting to tell my own stories from my own perspective, wanting just to tell like down to earth queer stories about just like queer people of color existing and vibing and being happy and like being messy and going through things that like queer young adults go through, like messy boyfriends and girlfriends and breakups and all of that stuff. Like that's the kind of stories that I'm working to tell right now. But yeah, if I can just make a story about messy queers and magical girl stuff, I'll be happy.
Or combine the two.
Yeah, exactly. Combining the two together to be a messy magical girl queer story.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah. Steve, what about you?
I mean, it's funny. I don't. I know we've talked about it in the past. I don't think I've always been a great fit for the type of LGBTQ plus or queer storytelling that's expected. You know, I tend to be the angry one that swears a lot, and I've accepted that because that is kind of what interests me. You know, like the first characters that appealed to me were people like Midnighter, and then I ended up doing that for my first book at DC. And at the time, it's because all of the representation that you were getting on TV and things like that didn't really fit how I saw myself. So of course you saw, like in a book like that, here's this guy and he's mean and like a borderline psychopath and also is queer, so that could definitely be me. And I feel like those are the type of things that still interest me, which is not to say writing about psychopathy, but like, yeah, DJ had said messy stories. For me, messy stories are about people that are, you know, angry and violent and working through identity issues. And that's played its way out in a lot of my work, probably differently than with other people. But the nice thing about that is, you know, sometimes it's direct. You know, if I'm doing a story like Kill a Man, which is just about a gay mixed martial artist, sometimes it's implicit. If I'm doing a book like Martian Manhunter, which is about having something inside yourself that you know is different, but you can in theory pass. You can in theory hide it. Being bisexual, that's a big thing for me that I don't always get to talk about. because the community has always struggled with accepting something that's not in the binary. So to be able to get to tell that story, that was one of the first times I was able to talk about that passively with someone like John Jones, but then actively with his partner, Diane Mead, who goes through struggles and misconceptions about bisexuality. So I feel like the stories that I gravitate to are ones that have a lot of animus built around identity, and sometimes they do play out with direct queer themes, but sometimes they play out, as DJ said, as other folks said, with other aspects of my life, whether it's being Jewish, whether it's being any number of things, whether it's being, as my lit agent said, the gay bro of comics, even though I'm bisexual and only contradict. I'm interested in people with powerful, usually explosive emotions that can play out in a variety of ways. And if it's me, yeah, someone's going to usually get punched in the face. I think after 7 years, there's a certain expectation with my work, and I'm okay with that.
I mean, I think that's great because that offers variety to a community that otherwise could be stereotyped as like all queer books are going to be like this, or So I think that's needed, and that's great. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like I try to do a lot of personal narratives, or I've been struggling a lot with seeing myself in comics over the years, and I think that's something we've all kind of grappled with. And so a lot of the stories I try to tell kind of fill in the blanks of what I've always wanted to see. And comics kind of at their core are power fantasies. And I think what my power fantasy is queer people being happy, getting along, being inspirational, and caring for one another. And that's something I try to infuse into my work, whether it's my nonfiction stuff, which kind of speaks to the moments we're in, like the stuff for the Nib, or just like this Aaron Fisher character who protects runaways and the homeless. Like, these are issues that I care about that aren't really being represented as much in the comics, sphere. And so that's something I'm always trying to work towards and refine.
Nice. Ethan?
This is something you and I've talked about before, Terry, where I'm very inspired by like the kind of like glitzy operatic 80s films. You sort of have things like Labyrinth or Legend or Willow, and I loved those sorts of stories, along with kind of books along a similar vein. I know you, Terry, you have a big love of Return to Oz, which is definitely on that list. Right there.
Yeah, there we go.
And it took me a long time, I think, to realize, just apart from enjoying the aesthetics, of why I like those sorts of stories. And I think it's because they have that very sort of identity and found family, and just sort of like, these big epic quests of like finding yourself or finding, the community that accepts you or whatever. And so I liked writing books about that sort of thing. I've been lucky enough that I mostly do creator-owned original graphic novels, and so I've been able to kind of indulge in a lot of those sort of impulses. That's been a lot of fun, and it's just sort of I didn't really go into comics sort of expecting to tell gay stories, because I came out, I don't know, maybe a year before I got my first professional gig. But it was in that coming out that I kind of found the emotional honesty that I think was necessary for me to write stories, because my writing improved dramatically after that happened. Anything that doesn't have a queer character, either explicitly or implicitly. I think a lot of us are kind of in that boat of like, whether or not we have like an explicitly queer character in our books, we write queer stories because we ourselves are queer. My work goes.
Yeah, I think similarly to you, when I started working in comics, I wasn't completely out to like my parents or my family. And I was really inspired by a lot of autobio comics I saw that were being made by like Emmy Lennox and Natalie Norragat. And I wanted to do that. But then I thought, like, I don't want my parents to find out I'm gay, like through a comic book on the internet. So it's funny how I had to think, like, if I want a successful career, if I want to like write the stuff I want to write, then I sort of have to come out to my parents. So that happened. Claudia.
Well, I'm going to echo a little bit of what Steve said. I normally do a lot of things. I do a lot of young adult and children's comics. I love doing that, but I gravitate more to more explosive, intense emotions, and particularly in my personal narrative that I haven't been able to, write a lot since I started my career. But I do love writing, and I write a lot of really angry lesbians. And I think my experience, stems from all of this loneliness and all the things that I experience, and I love putting a little bit of that into my personal narratives, like the anger, the isolation, the feeling broken. There's a lot of broken people that I love seeing queer joy in comics. I love it. Like, I live for that. I write a lot of that in my stories and the things I work in. But I do love, and I want to see really, broken people who are gray, and they don't have to be nice people because the people are like that. That we have enough gay characters, queerness around us to let characters be characters and not like an example of what we should be doing. I would love to write a bunch of different people, like really terrible villains who are terrible just because they want to be. I want heroes who are broken. I want enemies to lovers, stuff like that. But that's the kind of thing I gravitate to, like fantasy, horror, and things where I can explore those themes. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think that comics have always been a way for young LGBTQ plus teens and adults to build like communities where we identify with, often, I guess, like masked characters with dual identities. The obvious metaphor is there. We kind of know why we gravitate to that. But why do you think comics is the medium that's done that for us, as opposed to, say, like prose or prose literature? So that DJ doesn't have to answer first to every question, let's start with Claudia.
Well, I honestly, I don't know. Since I didn't really discover all these narratives on my own in comics, I did it through a mix of my own experiences, cartoons, TV shows, and comics. It wasn't like the only thing that made it, but I feel, especially in the comics I read, I feel like they are free to experiment in a graphic way. The show don't tell stuff, like, there's subtext or things happening in the things you're reading because of what you're seeing in there, and not necessarily in the text you're reading. So I think it might be, in a way, the subtext. I don't think that happens anymore, but like back in the 90s, I was figuring things out. So it was via subtext, and half of it was like looking at the images and seeing the things that made everything click. And I think that's the way, at least personally, that comics spoke way more than other mediums to me.
Ethan, what about you?
I think it's because when you have an illustrated medium, there's so much more room for the reader to interpret their own experience into it. So like with prose, you're often told what a character is thinking at any given moment. You're sort of in their head. Whereas with illustrated stuff like comics, you are given the words and you are given the illustration, and you have this time to kind of explore the relationship between those two. And I think it allows you to kind of like read in your own experiences into it a little more effectively. And I've always really liked that thing about comics, where it is a much more easily interpreted medium, I think, than say prose. I think it just depends on what you want to use it for. I think there are a lot of really great queer stories that can be told with prose or with film or with video games or animation. But the thing I love, I think, the most about comics that I try to use in my own work is the fact that you can sort of linger in comics. So when you're reading a prose novel or watching a movie, every word leads naturally to the next word. Every second of the film has to keep going in that sequence. Whereas with a comic, you can stop on a panel if someone's making sort of an interesting face in response to something someone said. And you can stay there as long as you want without really interrupting the flow of the story. And I think the ability to do that really helps people to kind of ingrain themselves into a narrative. And And I think it's especially important if you're queer and you don't really have the chance to put yourself in narratives a lot. And so even if, like Claudia was saying, it's more subtext, it's easier to explore that subtext in comics, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's really similar to what I would have said, because I feel like comics are still one of the only like interactive mediums that we have where we get to, as a reader, make the decisions of how long we linger on a panel, you know, where we kind of look in the next one. And maybe it's sort of similar to video games in a way, where you're interacting with them in a different way as opposed to a film. Like DJ, maybe you can speak to that too. Like, why would comics or games, you know, be the medium that we gravitate to in that way?
As someone that is a comic book like an artist primarily, and has more recently gotten into writing, but is also a person that plays lots of games that are like visual novels, like, or like point to click things like a Danganronpa game, or like even like the Persona games are like half dating simulators and half RPG. Like, there's something that is really special about comics, and especially like in something like manga specifically, in Japanese comics, that they lingering on the moments, like Ethan was saying, like lingering on those particular moments, because you can hold on a particular reaction. You can do a page turn to a double page spread that really like makes a moment really bombastic or really special or really intense or really sad or emotional. Like, there's so much like comics theory about like what you do, like what you're reading in between the panels and going to a page turn and what the payoff is. Like, there's so much theory behind that, and why some of those things I think work better in comics than they do in other mediums. Like, because there's so many like anime, for instance, where people are like, oh, you should read the manga, because like there's something about like the pacing of the comic that just hits different than like the show does. But like, yeah, I study a lot of like manga as part of my day job, and then just in reading, because that's the kind of stories that I like to read. Like, I always go back to Rumiko Takahashi, who I think is like a master storyteller and a master artist. And like, I could just look at Meison Ikoku, Urusei Yatsura, Ranma, Inuyasha. Like, I could look at all of her stories like all day. And it's just like she's a master of like putting just enough information on the page and it being incredibly visible and readable and like easily digestible. And I think that's kind of what comics has over other mediums, is that comics has the ability, again, to kind of control time and those moments, but it also has the ability to leave enough room for the reader to interpret some things on their own, while the artists themselves, the artist and writer combination, have like laid out this beautiful illustration or these panels out, but there's still room for interpretation, which I think you don't really get with watching a movie, because every shot is boarded and curated, and every word is written with intent. So that ambiguity to where the reader can kind of interpret something themselves is, I think, what makes comics really special.
Yeah, I think especially with something like Ranma, you know, you can read a bi narrative, a gay narrative, a trans narrative into that story and sort of interpret what you want there. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I would add that, you know, comics has always kind of been an underground medium, and in that it has fewer gatekeepers, and I think it attracts kind of a special class of outsiders. I know personally I gravitated towards comic because there's that immediate connection you have with the page, and we've kind of discussed on the page turns and the panel structure. Yeah, I think that that's always been the case for me personally, and just kind of I would agree with everything that's been said.
Steve?
I think what Josh said, I mean, is what I was gonna hit if no one else did. It's an outsider medium, or at least it was for a long time. And I think at least when I got into it, and even now, I mean, it's funny, there were no gatekeepers, and now like a certain class of folks is afraid that people who aren't exactly on the outside like them are putting locks on the gates. But fuck those people. You know, but I think there is something to that. Like, it is, you know, it's underground, as they said. It's an outsider medium, and because of that, it feels like there's I don't know. There's even though there are rules, there it feels like there are no rules to the type of content you can get. You know, especially when you're looking at like zines and really underground things. Like, I think a lot of people gravitate inside for a twofold reason. One is that you might be able to find narratives in a faster, you know, more sort of DIY medium that you wouldn't be able to find elsewhere, because the only person stopping someone from telling that story is a printing press, you know, especially in the age of Kickstarter. And as well, I think that, as Josh had said a couple questions ago, it's an empowerment fantasy. And that's why, I mean, that's, at least we were talking about Capes comics, like, we want to feel like we can be the hero of our own story. And that's always the most popular characters have always kind of said that through allegory, you know, whether it was Jewish folks creating Superman, whether it was, you know, the old Parker Luck, you know, like he's a superhero, but he can't even find $5 to make rent. Whether it was stuff like Milestone, which is now just coming up for a relaunch, like, folks deserve to be the hero of their own narrative. And I think, at least if we're talking about, you know, the Cape side of things, which is more what I do and more what I read when I was younger, we want to feel like that's us, you know, and either directly, like we're getting now, or indirectly, like when I was younger.
Yeah, recently I think there's been a lot of discussion regarding like creating new queer characters versus retconning existing characters into an LGBTQ space. And I have certain thoughts about that. I feel like if I came out to somebody, I would hope that friend wouldn't be like, I already have gay friends, like, we're good. Like, that just seems kind of strange to me. and so I mean, the character I think about is Iceman, obviously, right? But then you go back and read like X-Men #1, and he is like the only one not interested in Jean. He's sliding down like an ice pole. Like, it's like from the get-go very queer, in my opinion. And so I'm wondering what you might say to someone who is maybe not necessarily struggling with that, but might have the opinion of like, why not just create new queer characters? Why do we need to do that for existing characters? DJ, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of this. Like, I don't have a problem with like the idea, especially when it comes to Cape Comics and how often that they like do new story arcs and like relaunch characters with like a retelling and like of like different stories. And sometimes it's completely different people taking up the mantle of that character. So why not? Like, I don't typically have a problem with that, but I often feel like that comes at the expense of like them kind of like publishers kind of being like, oh, we've got enough gay things, like that's enough. Like, we don't want, because we don't know if the story is going to do well or not, because companies are so risk adverse, like that they are like, I don't know if I want to take a chance on this new thing of like a character that nobody knows, that's queer or whatever. So it's hard, but like I feel like with things like Webtoon and just being able to make your own comics and put them on Gumroad or Kickstarter or whatever, it's kind of leveled the playing field a little bit. So if, you know, you don't want to go through like a traditional publisher, so to speak, you can just like make your own queer characters and there will be an audience for those. But yeah, I guess if we're talking specifically in the case of like retconning like pre-existing characters, I welcome it. Like, y'all want to make Spider-Man gay this time? Okay, like, great. I don't care. Bring it on.
Yeah, if you want to read straight Spider-Man comics, you have a bunch you can read.
It's not like there haven't been a million straight Spider-Man comics since like he's been around. So why not this one time letting him be gay? Why not?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to hear from Steve and Claudia, especially because, you know, we have this new character that's debuting in the Marvel Voices Pride issue. And so there is that new character who's been created with like a queer narrative. So I'm wondering what you guys think about that. Claudia?
Well, I personally think that I don't mind either way, because I think people should have fun, especially with, you know, superhero comics. They're meant to be campy and ridiculous, and why not do all the things you want to do with them? They're characters that you can I mean, they keep popping out of the dead, so why not make an iteration gay? Why not make some different character? I don't know, I feel like I have no preference to that. I love seeing new characters, but I also love seeing like other people take the mantle of that character. I love seeing like a different universe where this character is a completely different person. I just think like, let people have fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Steve?
The answer is you have to do both to me, because the thing is, I mean, look, I'm very excited about what I'm doing with Claudia and Somnus, and the key to any new character, which I'll get back to, is that the thing about new characters is it's exciting, but there has to be follow through because they're easy to ignore. You know, when I was at DC, I probably created 15 to 20 characters on the sexuality spectrum. How many do people remember? How many do even readers within the queer community know I created? Because either they didn't, the books didn't find them in marketing or something or else, take your pick of reasons. There's an anchoring and there's a show of support and an auspiciousness that comes with doing something like what Josh did, which is like, this is not just a new gay character. This is also someone that's within the lore of Captain America. There is something to, and this is not like, I'm not trying to break the internet here, but like, if you found out that this whole Playboy thing was a front and Green Arrow came out tomorrow, there would be something in the metatextual narrative that DC was sort of standing behind with a character of that level joining the community. And it's a character that, maybe the day-to-day reader can't ignore. And so that's important because for characters to have staying power, there needs to be follow through. And this is not necessarily what this panel is about. So all I'll say is that like everything is connected. So, a new queer character comes out. I can even double down further. A new queer creator creates a new queer character at the big two, but retailers don't know that character matters, or don't expect that character will matter, or that the creator matters. So the book's under-ordered. It's usually canceled by the time it's on the stands. And then that character's gone because to the publisher, because the numbers weren't there, they've already decided the demand isn't there. And that's a false positive or a false negative. Take your pick, whatever the correct grammar would be there. So we need to do both. We need to have these big characters. I mean, for example, like if Kate Kane wasn't Batwoman, but was just like Night Lass or something, to be frank, no one would remember her now, right. 10 plus years on.
Yeah.
So there is power to lending the existing legacy to new faces, not just in our community, but from any variety of communities. And then you have to buttress that with new characters and support them. You've got for every Freedom Ring, a gold star, if you remember who that is, there's a Kamala Khan. Not that she's a queer character, but we're just talking about representation. And that happens not just because it's a great character with people with lived experience behind it, but because publishers are marketing, they are supporting. Those books are on the stands in multiple ways, and that's how you make these things last. And so it's got to be both. But having done it so many times, I have to say, like, it's not enough just to put the character out there. Like, it's like does a tree fall in the woods, right? Mm-hmm. Like there has to be support on a holistic level from a creative and a marketing and a publishing standpoint for these things to stick.
Yeah, I firmly believe like we can't just make those characters. The people behind them, maybe within the company, whatever, have to help other people know they exist,
right?
So that we can get behind them. Josh, you can speak to that because of this new Captain America.
Yeah, it's interesting because like when the character was announced, he really blew up. I think beyond anyone's understanding. He was on like TMZ. He was in like political blogs. Like he suddenly became like the biggest thing in the world for 1 minute. And there was that typical backlash of, oh, why did you make Captain America gay? And it's Captain America as a character that's kind of draped in so much symbolism. How could we not make Captain America gay? Like our identity and our group kind of needs representation, and there's so much power in these symbols. And even more to that, comics is just kind of an iterative medium. There have been 50 years of Iceman stories, but were any of them particularly interesting until he came out? Harley Quinn was kind of a one-note TNA character until she became a hero, became bisexual, and really became a symbol of empowerment. So it is a responsibility of like us creators to do better and to keep kind of recontextualizing these fantasy worlds for each other. But a lot of it is on retailers and publishers to give us the support we need. I mean, I'm so grateful to do panels like this, but I feel like we do panels like this every June, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we really need the support year round, so we don't feel like we're just the flavor of the month.
Yeah, that's what Priyanka said, she's like, I'm gay all year. Like all year.
All year, baby.
And Ethan, you've created some great queer characters in your books with Estranged, books and stories that like brought me to tears because of how much I love them. And so
thank you.
And it's great, I think, because you and I also operate in an arena where a lot of the stuff we do is for like sort of young adult or middle grade. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what everyone's saying, where it's important to have these new original characters and to constantly have these new voices coming up, because it allows you to create a mythology for a character that is not tied to the baggage of a legacy character. But to Josh's point, sometimes you can use that legacy, you know, for your advantage when telling the queer narrative. When you have someone like Captain America, who has this decades-long history of these narratives of patriotism, it's helpful to be able to recontextualize that through a queer lens, so that it kind of brings the weight of that legacy to bear in a way that is constructive for a society. But yeah, I think what everyone else is saying, I think it's important to do both, and both need to be supported, both from fellow creators, from whatever publisher or marketing might exist, from the readers themselves. Yeah, and it's I think characters should exist in the same way that queer people exist, which is to say a broad spectrum of them, you know? And I think the more we can encourage that as an industry in comics, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, and to go back to what I was saying about like Spider-Man, like if they made Spider-Man gay, well, great. If you want to read straight Spider-Man comics, there's a bunch. And
right.
But Josh, can you clarify a little bit? Like, you know, I think people will sensationalize, especially with something like, say, TMZ or whatever, to get a news story. Like they made Captain America gay, but like this isn't Steve Rogers, right? This is
no, he's an original character that's kind of taking on the mantle of Captain America for his community, and so he's one of many who are kind of doing that. And I think had people just held their breath for a little bit longer, they'd see that it's from a different kind of disadvantaged groups that are coming together and making that symbol their own.
Yeah, the way I sort of saw it was similar to, say, like America Chavez, where in the Young Avengers, she's sort of that stand-in for like a Captain America. And as someone who speaks quite often about, like, in the United States, the most underrepresented group, largest ethnic minority group is the Latinx community, then it was great to see how like that's represented in an American sort of image. So yeah, considering the last question that we just spoke about, I'm wondering if you could work on a dream IP, what would it be? DJ?
For anybody that knows me personally, this should come as to no surprise to anybody. If I could work on a Sailor Moon anything, like I would absolutely lose my mind. Like, and even if it's just like, can I be in the room with the person that's in charge? I will get their coffee. Like, I don't care. Like, just let me be in the room and like have a conversation. But yeah, I would love to do like something that's like work on like an anthology that's like a love letter to Sailor Moon or something like that, because like that story, that manga is like perfection to me.
I think now you need to do like someone who like a little illustrated thing of someone who shows up like really tired, drinks their coffee, and then has this like Sailor Moon transformation.
Yeah,
that needs to happen.
It needs to happen.
Steve, what about you?
It's tough. I'll say like I've been luckier than some. You know, I broke into comics writing a character that in Midnighter that 5 years before that I was complaining about what I would do if I ever got my hands on Midnighter in like the back of a Denny's, right? So I've been very lucky in that. And you know, I was the writer of Wonder Woman, so you know, like I did have some moments that were benchmarks for me, and now they're past. So it's, you know, what happens now? Well, now new challenges, and there's like exciting answers to folks who read, you know, capes and costumes comics. Like I would love to do more. I would love to do something like actually in the current moment on Krakoa. Like we made Somnus, but I've never worked really in what I think is a watershed moment for the X-Men line right now. I've never actually worked on Captain America. He's probably my favorite Marvel character that people care about, because my favorite Marvel character is Captain Universe, who 4 people care about. But you know, I'm also I'm also trying to do stuff that people don't expect. So the real answer, like I'm doing, you know, sometime whenever it's done, I'm doing a gay passion play. I'm doing the passions of Sergius and Bacchus, which is sure to anger people.
That sounds great, though.
That sounds amazing.
So for me, the real answer is I want to do stuff. I want, I've been doing capes for like 7 years, and I'm going to still do them because I love them. But I also want to do weird artsy stuff that maybe people don't expect from me. I'm not like the normal, like, despite everything I just said about liking punching in the faces, punches in the face, like most of my icons are people like Werner Herzog who still can't get funding for something today. So it's a shock that my originals are usually strange. I would much rather do like, as a counterpoint to my mainstream stuff, yes, things like let's do a 100-page passion play about these gay saints, and let's make it an homage to the silent film era. So for the 7 people who are excited about that, that'll be out next year. But I'm one of them, and that is my answer because I've been privileged enough to work on a lot of these icons. I want to now take the opportunity to do stuff that maybe is unexpected, and by the way, is still shining a light on our broader, like outside of comics, queer narrative. Like people should know about Sergius and Bacchus. I'd love to do an adaptation of The Sins of Jack Saul. It would not be at a mainstream publisher because he's just a prostitute in the 1800s. But like I want to put a light on things that maybe younger generations, up and coming generations don't necessarily know about when it comes to our shared history, which brings me back around to what I'm doing with Claudia, because Somnus is nothing if not an ode to previous generations of queer folks. I live around a lot of folks in their 70s and 80s now that are gay, and I just think about what it must look like in the modern world today. I mean, what I must look like sitting with my boyfriend in the porch making jokes about bottoming to someone who probably wasn't out until he was in his 50s, And so those are the real things that I want to do now, because I have done a lot of icons, but what we can do now for me is talk about icons within our community that maybe younger folks haven't yet met.
Yeah, I watched this great documentary called P.S. Burn This Letter, where they interviewed a bunch of drag queens who are now in their 80s and 90s. And one of them said, "Oh, I don't like that term. We didn't go by drag queen, in the 50s. We preferred to be called femme mimic." And I was like, I've never heard this. I've never even heard this term, and like this shared history that we would have lost if not for like these narratives and these stories that we, I think, need to hear and be told are so interesting that, I find that to be really, really great. Josh?
Yeah, I do a lot of like nonfiction comics, so I'm always interested in doing more biographical stuff for kind of lesser known queer figures. I'm really interested in like queer villains, like people who are queer but are kind of like monsters of history. I don't think we explore that enough. I say in one breath I want to do uplifting gay stories, and then the other side I'm like I want to do stories about dastardly people.
Yes.
In terms of like an IP, I would be a bad queer person if I didn't say the X-Men, and I'm definitely interested in kind of bringing my sensibility to bigger franchises. I'd love to make a Star Wars. I'd love to make a gay Star Wars. Yes. And short of that, I'll just write about Padme and the Handmaidens.
There you go. Ethan, what about you?
Well, I'm sort of lucky in that most of my sort of bread and butter as a writer and illustrator is fairy tales. So those sort of tend to be cultural heritage, and I can sort of pull from them at will. In terms of pre-existing things, I'm always very interested in adaptations between one medium and another. So I really like things like graphic novel adaptations of prose novels and seeing what kind of different angles on the story you can tease out. A dream one for me would be adapting some of John Bellaire's books. He's kind of a slightly lesser known children's YA author. He wrote a lot of like gothic supernatural horror for children, like, very, pre-R.L. Stein. And they're all books about like isolated young boys who go to live with their eccentric uncles and their flamboyant neighbor who's secretly a witch, and then their best friend gets possessed by an evil necromancer or something. Like they're very, very spooky and very queer, and I would love to do some like comic riffs on those.
Yeah, that sounds very like Courtney Crumrin.
Yeah, very much so.
That's great. Claudia?
Well, I really like the idea of just letting things happen, because I don't know where I'm gonna end up. I love doing everything. It's been an incredible parade of surprises. The way I actually got called by Marvel to work on Steve's story, which was like, whoa, I don't know how I could top this. And I love like, I love feeling exactly that with every project, because it's like, well, I don't know how I'm going to top this, and then something else comes and I'm like, whoa, this is really cool. So I want to keep the element of surprise, but I'm really into I really love books, and I love prose, and I would love to do adaptations for books I really love, like for example The Locked Tomb, which is really gay, really campy, and really fun. And I'd love to do a take on that. It will be amazing. I love to do anything. I'm up to anything.
That's great. Yeah, I think anyone who knows me, like DJ said, knows that the thing that I'm still obsessed with to this day is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I want to know why this takes place in Southern California and there are no Mexicans anywhere.
Yes.
So that's something that I would write. That
Make
I
it
would
make
do.
sense. Make it make sense.
Please. And I also, I mean, who doesn't want to write this? But I also really feel lately this strong connection to Superman, because I feel like as the son of an immigrant who had a secret he had to hide his whole life, like that's something I could write. You know, I remember an episode of Smallville where he was trying to help this kid who was an undocumented immigrant, and like Martha was like, no, this is wrong. We have to like let the authorities know. And he's like, did you not falsify my birth certificate? You know, he's like, I'm going to help this person. This is my friend. You did the same exact thing. So that's something I'd love to work with. And like Josh said, I'd be a bad gay if I didn't say X-Men. And I love what is happening in that universe right now. I guess as sort of a closing question to close this out, I'm curious, what do you want people to know or understand about storytelling in comics? Like, what do you think is often misunderstood? You know, I think so many of us say like, oh, I work in comics, and people are like, oh, cool. So like Garfield or like Spider-Man, like maybe, but what do you feel is misunderstood, and what would you like people to know about working in comics as a medium? Let's start with DJ.
That it's hard and it's a long process. I think, yes, in terms of like producing something, comics for sure don't take as much time as, let's say, putting together a movie, making a live action thing or something like that. It's definitely more accessible in that aspect, but I think there are more to comics. As much as I do enjoy a cape comic, there's so much more to comics than just that. There are very human, down-to-earth stories about people just existing and having relationships or whatever types of hardships that they have. There are very fantastical stories. Like, comics run the gamut. They run the gamut of all kinds of storytelling. Some of them are like adaptations of fairy tales. Some of them are adaptations of prose or TV shows or movies or whatever. Like, it's not just Garfield or Superman or Spider-Man. Like, there's so much more to comics than that. And just to, especially if you're getting into wanting to create, it is a long process and it's hard work. Even if it's your dream job, it's still a job. So like, be ready to work, and it'll eventually pay off.
Yeah, that's what I want people to understand too, is that, you know, if you think about movies, there's action movies, dramas, horror, there's fantasy. That's the same with comics. Like, comics aren't just one thing. Claudia, what about you?
Yes, that is like, it's incredibly taxing for your body, and I don't think many people understand that as much as you love doing comics, as much as you love drawing or doing things, this is a job that's gonna be very, very taxing to you, and you need to understand that you're here to work, and this is not like a passion project you're gonna do. This is your work, and this is your livelihood, and you have to show up and do the work. And also that I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but for example, my aunts and uncles are like, oh yeah, so you draw Spider-Man, so you create a character and it shows on the TV, and I'm like, no, that's not how it works. You draw it on the page. You don't do it on TV. So it's like, I don't know if anyone else gets this, but like, I don't draw Spider-Man. I draw everything else but Spider-Man.
Yeah, I tell people, oh, I draw comics. Like, oh, so Pixar. I'm like, that. No, not quite.
not the
quite.
same thing.
Not
Yes.
different. Like,
Or you work on an IP like Steven Universe and someone comes up to your table and they're like, "Oh, so you created Steven Universe?" I'm like, "No, girl.
I get that
I am not Rebecca Sugar."
Every
Yes.
time about Agretzko, they're like,
Mhm.
"So when's the next season coming out?" I'm like, "Baby, I am not Sanrio
Yeah.
or Netflix."
Ethan, what about you?
Yeah, just to kind of echo that, comics are a format, not a genre. You can tell any sort of spectrum of stories within them. But also, and I think this goes for both creators and readers, we're lucky enough that at the end of the day, what we do is we make cartoons. And so even if the stories we're telling or the stories you're reading are dire and intense and serious, comics are fun, they're enjoyable, and you should read them to have fun and enjoy them. And that's what I hope people will sort of take away from it.
Steve?
I mean, everybody's giving good, like, forward facing answers. So I'm going to come back. I mean, I will just give a different one, which is also very valuable. We talked about, things people don't understand, maybe don't know about comics. We talked about breaking into comics. Let me say this. Comics are a collaboration, which everybody who's on the inside knows. And if I tell young writers one thing other than do the work, which everybody has already said, it's that we're not in charge. We are part of a team. You are part of a team. And more importantly, if there is something that is the most important and that the writer makes the writer most important, it's not because we're in charge. It's because we're the first one holding the baton. So if we don't get the work done, everybody else that's part of this creative community and part of this team cannot do their work, and they cannot go about their life. So the thing that I would say that most people don't know is, things may originate with us, but it's a conversation, and we are part of a team, and other folks in our creative team don't work for us. You get better work from your collaborators if you treat them with respect and you give them room to do what they're there to do, which is do what they do best, whether that's line art, whether it's color art, whether it's all those things, whether it's book design or lettering. All those people are vital, and they're part of a creative ecosystem that you're in, but you're not running it and you're not holding the keys. So be collaborative, check yourself, and know that everything is going to be better if you're having a conversation with your co-creators instead of at them.
Yep. All righty, Josh.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what's been said. I would just say that comics are still being made. I don't know if you guys ever get that. Sometimes they're like, "Oh, they still make comic books?" And I'm like, "They sure do.
Yeah.
Slower than I'd like, but they're making them."
Mhm.
And I would just say the audience for comics is a lot different than it was even 10 years ago. When I started doing comics, I had a creator who looked at my work and told me to kind of not include any queer themes or queer content in my work, and also to change my last name because it sounded too foreign. And so I promptly ignored that. But that kind of gives you an idea.
Dixon, Josh, that doesn't make any sense.
I'm sorry?
I said, why are you getting advice from Chuck Dixon? That makes no sense at all.
It was a different time, and I'm so glad it's a different time now. Characters like Kamala Khan have done so much to kind of bring new voices and new creators. And I just think it's a lot more vibrant for people who maybe gave up on comics in the 90s or the 2000s. Like, now's the time to come back. Now's where there's a lot of energy to it.
Yeah, if people can learn to say Tchaikovsky, they can say Trujillo. Like, come on. All righty. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining me on this. Thank you. I'm going to list you all by name, and hopefully you can tell us where to find some of your work. But thank you so much, Ethan, Claudia, DJ, Steve, and Josh. Ethan, can you tell us where to find your work and where to find you?
My graphic novels are in most bookstores these days, and you can find me online on Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at Ethan M. Aldridge.
I see your books every time I go into a bookstore.
Oh, thank you.
Claudia?
Well, you can find me everywhere at Claudia Aguirre with only one A. And you can buy my books everywhere too.
All righty, DJ?
You can find me everywhere at Oh Hey DJ. That's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok with the Gen Z kids. I'm there with them too, hanging out. And then you can buy my graphic novel, The Black Mage, pretty much anywhere you can buy comics.
All righty, Steve?
I'm on Twitter at the Steve Orlando, and I'm on Instagram at the Steve Orlando. Both very easy. There's another one that's just a very patient video game designer that's been getting my emails. So it's always the Steve Orlando. And my books, I mean, yes, I can be found anywhere on the internet, anywhere that comics are sold. Right now, I would say, I mean, keep an eye on me at Marvel. Things are up and coming, but I'm everywhere. There's announcements folks don't even know about for the end of the year, including a gay slasher book that is unannounced. So what I would really say is watch for the next thing. If you want to talk about me saying that I do books that are angry and full of toxic emotions that are sure to get a reaction, let's talk about my 80s style gay slasher book that will be announced probably for this fall. So keep a lookout, and there's so much more to come. And I'm easy to find, probably too easy.
Alrighty, Josh.
Sure. You can find me online at Lost His Keysman or on my website, joshtrujillo.com, and I talk about some of my comics and game works on there.
Alrighty, and I'm Terry Blas. You can find me online on Twitter and Instagram at Terry Blas. And you can find my books in most comics and bookstores. My next book is Lifetime Passes with Claudia, coming out in October. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us here and for joining us at Pride Book Fest 2021. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.